Hi guys, today I'm going to be doing the If You Liked This tag. I was tagged to do this by Rose and Nicola. I will leave both of their channels down below. They're both absolutely wonderful booktubers, so do go and check them out. The premise of this tag is to talk about some books that may be well known, and then if you liked this particular book, recommend something that is maybe a little less well known or has the same themes or the same writer maybe. Something like that. First book I'm going to say is actually not so much a book, it's more of a collection. But if you have read The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings trilogy, as many people will probably have done, The Hobbit obviously is a big fantasy book and it has a massive fantasy world, lots of different characters and creatures. And I think if you liked this book, then you will definitely like some of the sagas of the Icelanders. Obviously, I am not massively well read in this, but I have read a substantial amount of sagas by now to be able to tell you that they are incredibly good. There's lots of Icelandic family sagas. Saga of Gisli is one of my favourites. And then of course you have things like the Saga of Volsung, and they're just really, really great. And you can definitely tell that Tolkien literally read these and went, yep, I'm having that. Even down to the names, there's things like Thorin. There's even kind of allusions to Gandalf and things like that. These are really, really easy to read as well. I mean, this looks massive, but these are all like tiny individual sagas, and they're very, very accessible, very easy to read, and I just suggest really, really checking them out because they are wonderful. Very, very quick reads. I've read a couple of sagas in a few hours and it doesn't take long at all, so yeah, this is definitely one worth checking out. As well as if you like Marvel comics, Loki, Thor, Odin, Ragnarok, a lot of that going on in these sagas. If you like Norse mythology in media and film, then definitely check these out. The next book I'm going to recommend is based on a book that I very recently read, which is Wild by Cheryl Strayed. This is a non-fiction book about a woman who loses her mother and decides to travel to, where does she go? West Coast of America. I only read this at the beginning of the year and I've already forgotten what happens in it. I really, really enjoyed this. It has a great protagonist. I mean, she's not really a character, she's real, but you see her development throughout the story and I really, really enjoyed this. If you did like the kind of travel themes in this book and the story of self-discovery and self-journey, then I definitely recommend a book called Travels with Charlie by John Steinbeck. This depicts a 1960s road trip around the US. He wanted to see the country kind of more personally, and it was later revealed, I think by his family, that he knew he was actually dying and it was his last chance to kind of see his country and, you know, the country that he writes about all the time. It's really, really wonderful. I absolutely love it. It's a wonderful travel memoir. It does have a lot of the description of the US, and of course I love that, but it also is about a personal journey, and I think that's the most important thing about these non-fiction memoirs. If she was horrible, which, I mean, sometimes she borders on it, but if she was really detestable, then, you know, it wouldn't be as much fun to read about. John Steinbeck travels with a dog. Obviously this is the Charlie of the title, and it's really, really just really heartwarming and wonderful. Some have said it's maybe partly fictionalized, but I just really like it. I don't hear enough people reading this book. A lot of people read Steinbeck, but a lot of people haven't really heard of his travel books, so yeah, definitely go and check it out if you can. I'll leave all the links below to Goodreads and stuff, so you can go and have a look in further detail. The next book I'm going to recommend is based on Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. Now, this is quite a strenuous link actually, but bear with me. Mrs. Dalloway is all about women and it's all about war, the effect of war and things like that, which that's the kind of inspiration I took for the book that I'm going to be recommending. While this is World War One and my book is World War Two, they have a similar theme. If you enjoyed this book, I think you're really, really going to like Resistance by Owen Shears. This book is actually a book that I don't mention an awful lot on this channel, but it is actually one of my favourite books ever. I read this pre-booktube, so I think that's why I haven't really mentioned it before, but it definitely deserves a reread. But it is so fantastic and beautiful. It's set in a Welsh valley in 1944, and the women of the village wake up to notice that the men have gone. This is essentially a story about the women of the village, and it's also kind of a parallel universe type look at if Germany was maybe winning the war rather than losing it. So beautiful. Owen Shears is primarily a poet as well, so every sentence in this book is written absolutely beautifully. The Welsh valley is described so good, and the characters all have their different independent personalities, and it's just stunning. It's really, really good. It definitely needs more recognition. It's so wonderful. The next book I'm recommending is based on Angela Carter's book of fairy tales. This is a absolutely stunning book, and it's a really wonderful collection. I've chosen Angela Carter mainly because I really just love her collection. I could have chosen any fairy tale collection really, even the original kind of Brothers Grimm, but I chose this one because it's wonderful. A lot of people talk about it, a lot of people know of it, but I really love it. If you liked Angela Carter's fairy tales, you might like The Book of Lost Things by John Connolly. Again, I know this one is a bit more well known than the others I've maybe recommended, but I really love it. Again, this is set in a war period, and it centres around Tom, who finds the books in his room start whispering to him, and he enters this world, this kind of fairy tale world, and he ends up meeting lots of different fairy tale characters and helping in a war in kind of the fairy tale land, which maybe mirrors the real life war, and it's just wonderful. This is very dark. I imagine if it was a film, maybe it would be like Tim Burton, something like that, because it's very twisted, it's very cool, it's a very different take on stuff. Snow White, for example, I seem to remember as being quite fat and get the dwarves to run around after her, I seem to think. I could be wrong, maybe that's a different story, but I think it's this one. And there's just lots of different characters in here, and I really enjoyed the different look in it. Roland and the Woodsman are really great characters, as well as David, and the ending is perfect and beautiful. And again, if you like fairy tales, it's just a very simple story, but it's a different twist. It's fresh and unique, and I love it to bits, and it definitely deserves a reread from me, so yeah. And the final book I'm going to recommend, both of these are kind of well known-ish, not really, but they're not really spoken about a lot on YouTube, so that's why I'm mentioning them today. Both include things like medical experiments and psychology and things like that, and the way emotions and intelligence relate to that kind of thing. So I think they're quite similar in some ways. The first one is Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. I loved this book. I think I read it last year or the year before, and so amazing and beautiful and heartbreaking. It centres around the main character called Charlie. His IQ is very low. So one day there is an experiment on intelligence, and it turns him into a genius. And what I love about this book is it starts off with very poor grammar wrong. For example, work is W-E-R-K and should is S-H-U-D and things like that, which is great. And then gradually you see him getting smarter and smarter. But then it begins to wear off, and he begins to lose his intelligence and go back to the way he was, and again it kind of shows the transition between him being smart and losing that ability to spell and things like that. And it's so heartbreaking but so wonderful. The character is so endearing. I can't think of enough like adjectives to describe it, but it's amazing. And again, it's classed as a sci-fi novel, but I maybe wouldn't, I mean, I suppose it is, but I just think it's so much more than that, and I love it. The book that I'm going to be recommending with this is The Effect by Lucy Prebble. The Effect is a similar kind of story to Flowers with Algernon, and it's all about the emotion of love instead of intelligence in this case, and how a pill might be able to make people fall in love. The Effect has kind of similar themes to Flowers for Algernon. There are two young volunteers, and they volunteer for this trial. It's kind of a look into the psychological effects of romance and the brain versus the heart and things like that. It also looks into depression, which is a very important part of the book, or play, sorry, not a book, it's a play. Both of these books are a bit more original. It's a love story in a sense, but it's a very different love story than you might get in, say, contemporary fiction or something like that. It's a really wonderful play. I wish I could have seen it performed live because I think it would have been fantastic, but to read it is really great as well. And of course, Flowers for Algernon is just amazing. It's so short as well, so you have no excuses. So that is my if you liked this tag video. I quite liked this tag actually. It was something a little bit different, but I enjoyed it. Hopefully you guys got some good recommendations. I've tried to pick a few books that you might not have heard of. It's kind of difficult because I don't have many of those kind of books on my shelves. A lot of them seem to be bestsellers and very hyped up books, so this was quite difficult, but I hope you enjoyed it. You're probably going to see an influx of videos in the coming weeks because I'm procrastinating profusely, and I'm on board with essays at the moment, but I am not inspired. I'm not translating Icelandic. Not a fun time. I'll see you probably 10 times this week.